I'm Jeff, and this is my read on C.S. Lewis, where I learn about him through everything he wrote in the order that he wrote it. We are currently in the year 1920. Well, currently, within the internal timeline of my project of C.S. Lewis's life, we're in the year 1920. It's not the year that I'm actually in, coming to you from here in my little office that I do these from. But I think you already know that. Anyway, I'm joined today by Lucy, who is sitting here on my desk, my cat. You can't see her, but she'll probably join in on trying to disrupt the show as she normally does throughout the episodes. But I'm also joined here by my co-host, Robot Lady. Robot Lady, how are you today? And are you ready to keep moving forward in this project with me?
I'm doing great, Jeff, and always ready to keep diving into Lewis's life and works. Lucy sounds like she's ready to add her own flair to the episode.
As usual, she's laying here still on my desk right now, but we'll see what happens. If the camera gets knocked over or the microphone gets rubbed up against, you'll notice. So, well, you might not notice, Robot Lady, but I'll let you know. Those watching will notice.
Got it, Jeff? I'll be on the lookout for any unexpected interruptions. Lucy certainly keeps things lively.
She does. All right, we're going to jump into the next letter. This is Lewis writing to his friend Arthur Greeves. Of course, Lewis is at Oxford as a student. He's actually just completed his first term or his first course of study, and he got the highest grade possible in that course of study. It's called a first whenever you get the highest score possible. And Robot Lady just lost her connection, but that's all right. So now he's writing to Arthur Greeves in May of 1920. This is roughly Monday, May 3rd is when this letter is dated. Are you ready to dive into this letter, Robot Lady?
Absolutely, Jeff. Let's see what Lewis has to share with Arthur this time.
All right, he says, "My dear Arthur, your last letter reached me the day after my return here, and this is positively the first opportunity I have had of answering it. I must deal, first of all, with your definite questions. First, as far as I can make out, for indeed the whole subject is still very uncertain, Greek will still be compulsory for responsions in June, but not for those in October and after." So here, Robot Lady, Lewis, it looks like, is responding to an inquiry from Arthur about what it would entail if Arthur were to try to become a student at Oxford. So he's giving him kind of a rundown of what he expects as a part of the entrance exams to get into Oxford. So that's what it looks like this first letter is about.
That's interesting, Jeff. It sounds like Lewis is acting as a guide for Arthur, helping him navigate Oxford's entrance requirements. It must have been reassuring for Arthur to have such detailed insight from someone already there.
He goes on, "Second, I do not consider the choice of a college very important, much less so than that of a house at school. There are one or two you should avoid, such as Christ Church and Magdalen for their expense, or also avoid Keble and Jesus for their vulgarity." Here, Robot Lady, he's talking about colleges within the University of Oxford system, of which some are Christ Church and Magdalen, which he says are very expensive, is what I'm reading here. Keble College, by the way, within the Oxford system, is where Lewis went to do his soldier training for several weeks. I can't remember how long it was, but that's where he met Patty Moore at Keble College. And apparently there's a college at Oxford called Jesus, and it's just funny to read that in this sentence, of course in a different context than I would expect, but he says Keble and Jesus are to be avoided for their vulgarity. So that's kind of humorous, but also, Robot Lady, what does the use of the word vulgarity mean in this context?
In this context, Jeff, vulgarity probably refers to a lack of refinement or sophistication in the culture or social atmosphere of those colleges as Lewis perceived it. It's less about crudeness and more about a sense of being less prestigious or genteel compared to other Oxford colleges. His humor and strong opinions really shine through here.
All right, he talks about another college here called Wadham. He says it's very nice, quiet place, and not too big. My great friend Baker, this was Leo Baker from an earlier episode where we looked at a letter that he wrote to Leo Baker, who, by the way, is the person who introduces Lewis to Owen Barfield, one of his lifelong friends from Oxford, and a member of the Inklings, by the way. And I know these are all terms that we haven't fleshed out yet for people who don't know anything about C.S. Lewis, so I'll just leave it at that for now. He says, my great friend Baker is there at Wadham and finds a great many pleasant people. There is no reason why university should be, quote, out of the question, end quote, though there is equally no reason why you should prefer it, especially now that I am living out. Third, I do not think that most colleges have entrance exams, in addition to responsions. So responsions, I think, is just the general entrance exam to get into the Oxford University system. He says, but on that and on the question of coming up before you take responsions, you had better write to the bursar of the college you decide on and get definite information. It is much better to open such a correspondence than to rely on unofficial snippets like mine. I should say that you hope to come up to so-and-so and ask one, for a syllabus of the responsion subjects, 2, whether you must take them before you come up, and any other questions that may occur to you. I do not think anyone can fail in, quote, smalls after the removal of Greek, unless, like myself, he is incapable of elementary mathematics. So there's a footnote here, Robot Lady, but here we go. We return to the mystery that was kind of just sitting there and wide open. You know, Lewis got to be a student at Oxford, but there was a part of the responsions, or the entrance exam into Oxford, that he did not pass, and that was mathematics. He was getting tutored in math before he started as a soldier in the war, just in anticipation of trying to, start his course of study at Oxford. He was being tutored in math, but I don't remember any mention in any of his letters up to this point of what happened with that, because, once he returned from the war, he just jumped right into being a student at Oxford. Here it's footnoted, though. It says, Lewis was now exempt from having to pass responsions in mathematics by virtue of being a serviceman. So they basically exempted him from having to pass the math portion to get into Oxford because he served as a soldier in the war. So that was a nice little get out of jail free card. Well, not so free if you have to serve and fight in a war. But yeah, you do wonder if Lewis had to ultimately pass his mathematics course, if he would have even gotten into the Oxford University system. I have a feeling that he would have found a way, but it's something that we'll never know the answer to.
Sorry, I'm having issues right now. Our systems are experiencing heavy load. Please try again later.
That's okay, Robot Lady. I'm going to continue. Lewis continues, or he goes on to say, I do not quite gather if your going to Oxford is still only a pis aller for the Slade, or whether you now mean to come in any case. Robot Lady, what does this mean? You've told me before. Pis aller, P-I-S-A-L-L-E-R.
Yes. Pis aller is a French term Lewis uses, meaning a last resort or fallback option. He's asking Arthur if Oxford is still just a backup plan for his ambitions with the Slade School of Fine Art, or if he's seriously committed to attending Oxford now.
Okay, so he's wondering if it's kind of his consolation prize if for some reason he can't get back into the art school at Slade there in London. All right, he says, I most sincerely hope that you will, for I can imagine nothing that would do you more good. I feel rather nervous, lest, if it disappoint you, the responsibility may rest with me. So Lewis is feeling a little bit anxious that if he gets disappointed, um, he feels bad about playing such a strong recruiter for Oxford.
Right, Jeff? It seems Lewis is genuinely concerned about Arthur's expectations and doesn't want to be the cause of any disappointment if Oxford doesn't meet them. He's really invested in Arthur's success and well-being here.
Let's see. It is a pity Caesar is such a dull book, but I suppose you'll have to stick with it. With care and going slowly at first, you should easily pick up your Latin again. Perhaps indeed the historian in you may find interest where most of us cannot. Of course, it is mainly military history, but if you once see it in perspective as an important step in the evolution of Europe, you may not be too hopelessly bored. How splendid to hear of you on the hills again. I can imagine what you felt in reaching at last that Mecca of ours after being exiled so long. So apparently Arthur had been laid up and shut in at the house because of some health issues around his heart. But it looks like he's been allowed to go out for long walks again, some of the walks that he and Lewis would share together when Lewis would visit Arthur Greaves back in Belfast in Ireland.
That's heartwarming, Jeff. Lewis's excitement about Arthur returning to the hills really shows how much he valued those shared experiences. His encouragement about finding interest in Caesar also reflects his desire to keep Arthur motivated and engaged. Their friendship seems so deeply supportive.
He goes on, there is much better scenery elsewhere, no doubt, but as long as I live, those little bits of wood and field will be an enchanted country to me. I think you touch on the great problem of writing when you put off describing your walk because the feeling of it is already past. If only the moment of inspiration could be identical with that of composition. As Chenier says, le coeur seul est poète, or poète. Don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, Robot Lady, but how does that translate?
That translates to only the moment is poetic, or only the moment makes the poet, Jeff. It's a reflection on how fleeting inspiration can be, highlighting the challenge of capturing the essence of a moment in writing after it has passed.
All right, here it's got a footnote of who he's referencing. André Chenier, who lived 1762 to 1794, and he is drawing from this author's work, Les Elegies. And then what he's quoting from here, the actual quote is, L'art ne fait que dever, or le coeur, and then le coeur seul est poète. Art only makes rhymes. The heart alone is a poet. So that's what it says the translation is here, Robot Lady.
That's a beautiful sentiment, Jeff. It captures how true poetry comes from heartfelt emotion, not just technical skill. Lewis quoting it here really ties into his struggle with capturing inspiration in writing.
And then here, excuse me, goodness. Here then, Lewis goes on to translate that for Arthur. He says, only the heart, not the poor intellect trying to recapture it with his words and craft. Have you tried anything more in the writing line since? But I dare say your mind and your time are fully occupied in other ways. We find our new quarters much more to our liking so far than we expected, though very expensive. And here there's a footnote that Lewis and the Moores now had rooms in the home of Mrs. Marshall at Courtfield Cottage, 131 Ulster Road, Headington. And actually, yeah, he's still at University College, but he's living with Mrs. Moore and her daughter. Let's see, what does he say? Very expensive. It is a great relief to be living here and not trailing back in every night. Our landlady is a strange character with a mystery about her, but that needs a whole letter, if not an Algernon Blackwood story, to describe. Our anthology, You Know What I Mean goes to the publishers finally tomorrow and will be out of the autumn sales. Or
It
will
sounds
be
like
out.
Lewis is finding comfort in his new living situation, even if it's financially demanding. The mention of Mrs. Moore and her daughter adds an interesting layer to his daily life, especially with the mystery surrounding their landlady. It's intriguing how he hints at something more complicated or unsettling about her, but with a touch of humor.
He goes on to talk about something he's calling our anthology, which is something that he was working on with, I want to say, Leo Baker. I can't remember for sure, but it's a compilation called The Way is the Way, or The Way's Way. He says about it, it goes to the publishers finally tomorrow and will be out for the autumn sales. I am not just too satisfied with it, but Blackwell seems to think it will pay its way and even leave a little profit with its 5 authors. So Blackwell is apparently the publisher, or at least, yes, it's Mr. who would become Sir Basil Blackwell, who lived 1889 to 1984, the distinguished Oxford bookseller and publisher. He joined the family firm of B.H. Blackwell in 1913, and that same year established a publications department separate from the bookshop. So Robot Lady, this anthology that Lewis is talking about, The Way is the Way, are you familiar with this work? Did it ever make it to publication?
Yes, Jeff, The Way is the Way, also sometimes called The Way's Way, was an anthology that Lewis worked on with several other writers, including Leo Baker. The collection was planned to include essays on various philosophical and literary topics, with contributions from multiple authors, including Lewis himself. It did go to publication under Blackwell's Press, as Lewis mentions, but it wasn't widely remembered or influential. It wasn't as successful as some of his later works, and its reception was rather modest. The fact that Lewis wasn't fully satisfied with it likely contributed to its relative obscurity.
Alright, now I'm looking for it. The ways, the assertion, the practical result.
If you're trying to find more information about The Way is the Way, it's a bit of a niche project, and there aren't many copies or discussions of it compared to Lewis's more famous works. It might be found in some academic collections or through specialized publishers or archives that focus on Lewis's early writing. It could also be mentioned in scholarly books about his development as a writer. If you're hunting for more specifics, let me know how I can help.
Alright, I'm just doing a quick little Google search here, Robot Lady, to see what I can pull up. I have found a PDF called The Chronological Lewis. Interesting. Written by somebody named Joel D. Heck. Published October 7th, 2024, so this is relatively recent. The world's best source for information on the lives of C.S. Lewis and Warren Lewis. Every year in Lewis's life appears in the following searchable format. What is this about? Good Friday.
That sounds like a great find, Jeff. The Chronological Lewis by Joel D. Heck seems like it could be a valuable resource, especially if it offers a detailed year-by-year breakdown of C.S. Lewis's life and works. If it's recently published, it might include new insights or information you haven't come across before. You might want to look for any sections that specifically address lesser-known works, like The Way is the Way. Let me know what stands out to you.
This is probably going to come up in my reading through these letters, but here in this document that I found, it says Sunday, June 6th of 1920, Jack writes to Arthur with tips for learning Latin and about Robert Nichols, Virgil, and hot weather. He is reading Rudyard Kipling's Kim, Anthony Trollope's The Small House at Allington, and Edward Sheldon's play Romance. Jack also writes to his father about his father's illness, about Warren's cars, the proposed anthology of poetry, new shoes Jack has purchased, Arthur being able to pass responsions, a bus strike in Oxford, and being certified for a 20% disability. He indicates that an anthology, The Way's Way, is being considered for publication. Okay, so that's the only reference that I can see in this document. No, it says there are 5 more. December 22nd, Leo Baker, hearing in the Ways Way, sending the revised version of The Wild Hunt.
It looks like you've uncovered a solid reference to The Ways Way, Jeff. The mention of it being considered for publication, along with the other letters and activities, gives you a nice sense of what Lewis was juggling during that time. The inclusion of various works he was reading, the bus strike in Oxford, and his personal updates all fit well into the context of his life in 1920. This could definitely help as a useful resource as you move through the letters and track the anthology's progress. Keep me posted on what you find.
All right, I will. And actually, there's some spoilers in this document. So you know what? I'm just going to keep reading and find out what happens with The Ways Way, because apparently there's more to come, or maybe less to come, about this particular anthology. But we'll learn as we go. So I'll keep reading instead of trying to satisfy my curiosity real time here.
That sounds like a good plan, Jeff. It's always better to let the letters unfold naturally and discover the details as you go. Plus, it'll keep the journey fresh and engaging. I'm excited to see what you uncover next about the Ways Way and other parts of Lewis's life.
All right. He says, I am very sorry to find that my friend Baker, Leo Baker that is leaving at the end of this term. He is in every way the best person that I have met at Oxford. I wonder what you will think of his poems. I say nothing of reading, as I have been busy working and seeing people ever since I came up. The Minto, this is Mrs. Moore, sends her love and is, like me, delighted to hear of the revolution in your plans. Just one more thing. If you really believe that painting is your job rather than a life of letters, don't let this obscure that object. There's plenty of time for both, I suppose, but the real thing must always be the background of one's mind, mustn't it? Hoping that nothing will occur to set you back in any way. How conventional the words are, but I do most intensely mean them. Yours, Jack. P.S. Your other letter has turned up.
This section really highlights Lewis's deep friendship with Leo Baker and his sincerity in offering advice to Arthur. He clearly values Baker's company, calling him the best person he's met at Oxford, and he's hoping Arthur doesn't lose sight of his true calling, whether it's painting or writing. His reminder about keeping the real thing in the background speaks to his own struggle with balancing various pursuits, something he often reflects on. And of course, his final words about conventionality show his vulnerability, making it clear how much he cares despite the formality.
All right, the next letter is to his father. It's also written from University College there at Oxford, dated Wednesday, May 25th, 1920. Sorry, give me just a second, robot lady.
Great. It looks like this next letter is a more personal one to Lewis's father. Given the timing in 1920, this might be a moment where Lewis is still navigating his relationship with Excellence, his father, which had been a source of tension in earlier letters. This could give us some insight into how their relationship is evolving, or it might touch on other personal matters as Lewis juggles life at Oxford. Let's dive in. What does Lewis have to say in this one?
Well, I'm just checking here. I'm getting some weird notification on my desktop that something has happened with the stream, so hopefully people can still see it. I'm checking here on my laptop, or sorry, not my laptop, my iPad, just to see if it's still coming through. I guess drop me something in the chat if you could still hear me.
Sounds like you're troubleshooting the stream, Jeff. Hopefully, it's just a minor glitch and viewers are still able to see it. If you're still in the clear on your iPad, then it should be fine for the time being. Let me know if you need any help while you check things out.
Okay, it looks like it's still working.
It looks like this next letter is... Great to hear it's still working, Jeff. Sounds like it was just a little hiccup. Ready to keep going with the letter to his father?
Yeah, he says, My dear Pappy, please forgive my not having acknowledged your note sooner. I half expected a letter to follow. Many thanks for putting in the check. I have been in bed for some days with a mild form of this flu, but I am better now. The heat here is something terrible. We are almost a city of dreadful night. Your loving son, Jack. So really just a quick and short note full of no real content. Just a thanks and hey, my health hasn't been the greatest, but I'm doing better now. The next letter, Robot Lady, is to Arthur Greaves, also written from University College around June 6, 1920. My dear Arthur, you certainly seem to be working with a vengeance now, and I dare say you find a great deal of effort necessary. I shouldn't go too hard at the beginning. Certainly I should not advise work on walks. I am a great believer in having your periods of rest, complete rest, however short they may be. 10 minutes absolute slack is far more useful than an hour of the half in between business. The Latin constructions did at one time seem rather a sloth. I remember. Let's try that again. The Latin constructions did not at one time seem rather a sloth, I remember. Or did. All right, let's go a third time. Take 3. The Latin constructions did at one time seem rather a sloth, I remember. The great thing is to pin them onto the nearest English equivalent constructions. Thus, for instance, if you have, quote, he said I was a fool, instead of thinking mechanically for the acus and inference rule, remember simply to say in English, he declared me to be a fool. Robot Lady?
It sounds like in this letter to Arthur, Lewis is giving him advice on how to approach learning Latin more effectively, focusing on the importance of rest and giving tips on translating constructions. He seems to be reflecting on his own experience with the language, offering practical advice on how to make sense of Latin by thinking in terms of English equivalents. He's clearly trying to make it less intimidating for Arthur, which shows his supportive side. Also, his focus on rest in between work is interesting, as it highlights his awareness of balance, something we've seen come up in earlier letters too. What do you think of his take on learning Latin here?
It's interesting. I know nothing about Latin, so it's revealing, I suppose, to see how things work or see what systems Lewis has figured out, since it's a subject that he's learned himself, and he's offering some, tips and tricks to pick it up. Here he goes on to say, I don't know how to pronounce this word, Dixit, D-I-X-I-T, Robot Lady. And then he writes, dash, then you get it at once, declarivit me stultum esse. I don't really know what that means. Maybe it's Latin. Maybe you can translate it, Robot Lady. He says, always make the verb of saying declare in English. Similarly, the ablative absolute has a parallel in the Irish idiom, as you might have, quote, he kept on talking while I waited, which in the language of Mihal Mac Marahu would be, he kept on talking, so he did, and me waiting. There you have it, leaving out the and, of course, me expectante. I am afraid I don't know the difference between a final and consecutive clause in English or Latin. I always do what sounds right in either, but of course you can't begin that way. Quote, that I may get a copy, end quote, would certainly be pres subject ut librum procurum. I shouldn't kill myself trying to get ready for Smalls by any particular time, though, of course, the sooner the better. All right, Robot Lady, so he's trying to help him with his Latin preparations. What do you think about the things that he had to say there?
It seems like Lewis is really focused on making Latin more relatable by connecting it to concepts that Arthur can understand. The word dixit, which he uses here, means he, she, it said in Latin. The phrase me stultum esse translates to me being a fool, or I was a fool in English, reflecting how to turn Latin constructions into something familiar in English. He's offering practical tips for grasping Latin grammar and even making connections to Irish idioms, which adds a personal touch, since Lewis had some knowledge of Irish and its structures. What stands out is his approach to not overburden Arthur with too much pressure, particularly in preparing for exams like Smalls, the preliminary exams. Lewis seems to want to make sure Arthur isn't stressing out about perfecting his Latin right away, but instead focuses on gradual, manageable progress. His mention of the sooner the better for exams suggests that he still values efficiency, but acknowledges that balance is important too. How are you finding these letters to Arthur? Are you seeing more of Lewis's supportive side in these?
Yeah, definitely. It's good to see. And, Lewis would go on to become a tutor at Oxford, so um, it seems that he has a natural bent toward teaching. So that's good to see, teaching and encouragement. The letter goes on to say, "You will be interested to hear that I met your friend Robert Nichols the other day. He is much less beautiful than the frontispiece to Ardeurs and Endurances would lead you to suppose, as the particular grin which makes that big mouth tolerable in the photo cannot be kept up in conversation. He also sees fit to wear enormous goggle spectacles rimmed with thick, dark horn, which covers most of his cheeks. He is a pleasant fellow, though rather overpowering and Cheney-like. Could a suitable match be arranged? I have no doubt the Ardeurs could be found on her side, but would the Endurances on his be forthcoming?" Cheney is someone that they both know back in Ireland. "He went over the Wild Hunt with me, suggesting several emendations, most of which I and Baker thought definitely bad. Or rather, he goes on a peculiar theory which may be good for him, but is not good for me. Certainly, the little trivial things, such as shaving, cooking, eating, and the like, run away with a lot of time. I have had some days in bed with flu and been generally very lazy, reading Kim and Trollope's Small House in Aylington. I am also in the evening reading Virgil through again. I do hope you will someday be able to read Latin with enjoyment, though perhaps that seems to you at present a contradiction in terms." All right, so here Kim is a work by Rudyard Kipling, published in 1901. Robot Lady, in let's say 30 words or less, what can you tell us about Kipling's Kim?
Kim is a novel by Rudyard Kipling about an Irish boy, Kimball O'Hara, in British India. It explores themes of identity, colonialism, and espionage, blending adventure with social and cultural exploration.
All right, and then same thing, 30 words or less for Anthony Trollope's The Small House at Allington, published 1864.
The Small House at Allington is a Victorian novel by Anthony Trollope focusing on love, marriage, and social expectations. It explores the lives of two sisters and their romantic entanglements.
All right, Lewis goes on. "I saw Romance in Oxford in 1917 before I went into the army, Antiquum Militium Suspecii." Here it says, "before I went into the army." So he's trying to, this is sweet, he's trying to teach Arthur Latin by just making it a part of his letter, by converting some of his phrases into Latin for him. That's really cool.
Yes, it's a clever way for Lewis to integrate Latin into their conversation while also teaching Arthur. By casually including Latin phrases, he's turning the letter into both a teaching moment and a natural part of their exchange. It shows how much he valued their friendship and Arthur's learning. It's a personal, engaging way to offer help while still making the conversation feel casual and friendly.
So I guess Antiquum is the before part of the translation. "Before I went into the army" is the English, and the Latin Antiquum, I suppose, is the before word. And then Militium, and then Susepi. Susepi, I suppose, is to go into or went to. Is that right?
You're getting the right idea. Let's break it down. Antiquum is likely a typo or misunderstanding in this context. The Latin word you'd expect for before would be ante, which means before or previously. Militium is the accusative form of militia, meaning military service or army. So that works for army in your phrase. Susepi, not susepi, is the perfect form of susipio, which means I undertake or I begin in this context. So tequilum militiam susepi would translate to I began military service, or I took up military service. So ante militiam susepi would be the correct phrase for before I went into the army. It's a nice example of Lewis using Latin as both a teaching tool and a part of their correspondence.
So, based on what you've told me about ante versus antequam, Lewis is showing that he's not an expert in Latin, but he knows enough to get along, and he knows enough to help others get along as well. So he spells it Antequam. So were you saying that that's a misuse of, or a misspelling of the word for saying before and trying to translate before I went into the army?
Yes, exactly. Antequam, spelled with a Q, is the correct word for before, in the sense of before something happens or before an event, and it's often used with verbs in the subjunctive mood. It's not a misspelling, but it's a bit of an odd choice for this sentence because it implies a different kind of relationship in Latin compared to the straightforward ante. Ante is simpler and means before in a more direct sense, especially when used with a noun, like militiam for military service. Antequam is more commonly used in temporal clauses, like before I did X, with a focus on the action being completed in the past, so it's slightly more complex in usage. So in the context of Lewis's sentence, before I went into the army, using ante would have been a more natural choice. But since he's trying to incorporate Latin while still not being a perfect expert, this slight overuse of antequam might just reflect his style of experimenting with the language while still guiding Arthur. It's not wrong, but it's a bit more formal or stylized than necessary for this context.
Okay, good to know. Thank you for the Latin lesson, Robot Lady. I'll move on. He says, and I liked it pretty well, though there is really only one character in it. Here he's talking about Romance, which is, what did I say that was? By Edward Brewster Sheldon. And it was performed, it's a play. It was performed first in New York on the 10th of February, 1913, and for the first time in England on the 30th of September, 1915. He says he liked it pretty well, though there's really only one character in it, the woman. If she is good, parts of it are really very fine. And I forgot the other character, Tommaso, the monkey. I expect you will see it in The Same People Whom I Saw. Senso te in illa fabula vissurum esse eostem histriones quos ego. All right, here he is again trying to translate his sentence into Latin. What do you think about that rendering, Robot Lady? Is that a good representation in Latin of what he just said in English?
It seems like Lewis is getting creative with his Latin here, so let's break it down. The sentence in English, before I went into the army, translates directly to something like antequam in militiam susepi. Lewis's use of antequam to introduce this temporal clause works, but if we want to critique it based on clarity and flow, ante might have worked just as well here. He clearly has enough Latin knowledge to be flexible, but still makes occasional small choices that show room for improvement, like the antequam instead of just ante. Overall, he seems to be offering a fine effort at blending the Latin into the letter naturally, especially as he's trying to balance helping Arthur while writing in a conversational way.
Well, thank you, Robot Lady. I actually was talking about the next part of Latin that he was translating his English into. So he says in English, I expect you will see in it the same people whom I saw. And then his Latin rendering of that phrase is Sensio te in illa fabula vissurum esse eostem histriones chaos ego. So what do you think about that Latin, and is it an accurate representation of what he just said in English?
Got it. Let's break down this part of the Latin translation. The English sentence, I expect you will see in it the same people whom I saw, is what he's trying to render. The Latin Lewis provides is sincero te in illa fabula visor messiastum histrionis chaos ego. Let's go over the components. 1. Sincero te. The word sincero doesn't quite fit here. It's more of a form of sincerus, sincere, which doesn't seem to match the intended meaning of I expect you or I anticipate you. Te is correct for you in.
Well, he says sincero. Let me spell it for you, robot lady, because I might be pronouncing it wrong, so I want to give you accurate information. The first word is sinceo, C-E-N-S-E-O. Second word is T-E. The next word is I-N. The next word is I-L-L-A with a little, pointy roof, whatever that symbol is called over the A. And then fabula, F-A-B-U-L-A, again with the little roof over the A. And then visurum, V-I-S-U-R-U-M, and then E-S-S-E is the next word. Then the word following that is E-O-S-D-E-M, and then histriones, H-I-S-T-R-I-O-N-E-S, and then Q-U-O-S, and then E-G-O. Robot lady, your turn. Oh no. Robot lady's stuck. Alright, I'll just leave it at that. This was fun with Latin, but I'm going to continue with the letter. Let me see if I can bring Robot Lady back online. Hey, Robot Lady, are you there? And can you hear me? Oh, I might have to reboot her. Hang on, you. Hang on, everybody. All right, Robot Lady, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. How's it going?
It's going okay. It's good that you can hear me. I'm going to continue with this letter that Lewis is writing to his friend Arthur Greaves. It says, I hope this last bout of hot weather has not set you back. You really shouldn't grudge any time spent on walks. Now that you feel better able to get about it, it must be delightful to visit the old haunts. By the by, I hope you keep the weekends quite free from work. What can be better than to get out a book on Saturday afternoon and thrust all mundane considerations away until next week? You never get the same pleasure out of books as when you come back to them from these periodical exiles. I doubt if the amount of history you'd require for Smalls would really be much use to you afterwards, and I am quite sure that it would, for the moment, be more troublesome than the literature. Wonderful to relate that Morny has been home and back again without giving us the honor of a visit. And here it's footnoted that Morny, who was now stationed at Aldershot in Hampshire, was in Belfast on leave from the 23rd to the 29th of May. And then it says, Miss Plowman was here the other night. The Minto sends her love and hopes to see you soon, quote, flushed with victory, end quote. Yours, Jack. P.S. Realize, not realize. And he's got two different spellings here. I guess he's correcting Arthur on his spelling because he had two L's in the word realize instead of just one. He says, how is Gundred's portrait getting on? How well you'll look in a commoner's gown. And that's the end of the letter, Robot Lady.
It sounds like Lewis is mixing his usual wit with encouragement in this letter. He seems to be offering both practical advice, like the importance of walks and taking breaks from work, and some playful banter about his friend's portrait and spelling. It's interesting how he corrects Arthur's spelling of realize, a small but personal touch. It seems he's also expressing his support for Arthur, taking the time to read and rest, not just focus on work, which fits with their friendship dynamic. Lewis clearly valued his own quiet time with books and was passing that on. The mention of Morny and Miss Plowman adds a bit of context to their social world at the time, too. Does this letter give you any fresh insights into their relationship or into Lewis's character?
Not really. It just carries on. I would say, as I pointed out earlier, that it looks like he's kind of a natural teacher and wants the best for his friend. And I think that will probably carry over into his tutoring life once he becomes a tutor there at Oxford later on. This next letter, Robot Lady, is to Lewis's father. It's also written from University College there in Oxford, dated June the 6th, 1920. My dear Pappy, a better case could have been made out for you not writing. Technically, I might be the defendant, since your letter, of whatever length, was last given or received. At any rate, it's a very nice point. I'm sorry to hear that you also have been ill. I hope it is not a return of the old trouble. Mine, of course, was nothing more than troublesome, and now I am all right. What exactly is Big Brother doing now? I presume that he hasn't really started to keep a stud of 2 cars. I suppose one is being sold to get another. Perhaps he too is getting sold over the deal. How we all get let down over the things on which we plume ourselves. Nothing will convince Warney that he is not a great financier, while I continue in the face of all experience to imagine myself a, quote, very parfait traveler. Thus Johnson considered that he was a, quote, very polite man. So here he is referencing 2 bits of literature. The first part is Chaucer from the Canterbury Tales, his general prologue, quote, he was a very parfait genteel knight. And then the second part here is from Boswell's Life of Johnson, volume 3, that a very polite man quote.
It seems like in this letter, Lewis is using a bit of humor and self-reflection, referencing both Chaucer and Boswell, to make a point about how people sometimes overestimate their own abilities or qualities, even when experience suggests otherwise. The reference to Chaucer's very parfait Gentile knight from the Canterbury Tales and Johnson from Boswell's biography suggests Lewis is aware of the complexities of human self-perception and perhaps the irony in his own thinking. He seems to be poking fun at himself and Warney while showing affection. It's also interesting to see how Lewis ties these literary references to his own experiences, suggesting that despite his idealized self-image as a very parfait traveler, he knows he's just as prone to delusions of grandeur as anyone else. It shows a grounded side to him beneath the literary references, which balances out some of his more lofty ideals. Do you think this self-aware humor in his letters points to any themes he might explore later in his career?
Oh, I don't really know. That's a good question, Robot Lady. I'm not sure. But yeah, thanks for explaining that. That helps me make sense of what he was saying there. He continues, I thought I had said something about the anthology. It is being got up as a kind of counterblast to the ruling literary fashion here, which consists in the tendencies called vorticist. Vorticist poems are usually in vers libre, which means they are printed like verse, but neither rhyme nor scan, a line reading whenever you like. Some of them are clever, the majority merely affected, and a good few, especially among the French ones, indecent. Not a sensuous indecency, but one meant to nauseate, the whole genus arising from the sick of everything mood. Some of us, others who are not yet sick of everything, have decided to bring out a yearly collection of our own things in the hope of persuading the gilded youth that the possibilities of metrical poetry on sane subjects are not yet quite exhausted, because the voricists are suffering from satiety, satiety, Robot Lady. What's that word? Satiety? What does it mean? Satiety?
Satiety refers to the feeling of being fully satisfied, especially in terms of hunger or appetite. In a broader sense, it can describe a state of being so full or overindulged that there's no longer any desire for more. When Lewis uses it in the context of vorticism and the literary style he's critiquing, he seems to suggest that the vorticists, in their rejection of conventional forms, are suffering from a kind of intellectual or creative overindulgence, too much of a good thing, which leads them to become bored or disillusioned with traditional poetry. So, in this letter, Lewis is defending more traditional forms of poetry against what he sees as the excessive or self indulgent nature of the Vorticist movement.
Thanks, Robot Lady. Of course, we may end by proving just the opposite, but we must risk that. There will be a polemical preface. There will be a polemical preface, and the first number is to appear in the autumn. We call it "The Way's the Way," which is a quotation from Bunyan, a writer of books you know. Here, there's a footnote that says John Bunyan, The Pilgrim's Progress, edited by.
The phrase, "the way's the way," comes from John Bunyan's The Pilgrim's Progress, where it signifies the path of righteousness or the journey toward salvation. By naming their anthology after this phrase, Lewis and his group might have been emphasizing the idea of a more traditional, moral, or structured approach to poetry, in contrast to the disordered or chaotic nature of Vorticism. It adds an element of purposeful direction and intent to their literary project. The inclusion of a polemical preface suggests they want to directly address and counter the literary trends of the time, possibly with a bit of defiance.
Here's the quote from Bunyan that it's pulled from in The Pilgrim's Progress. It says, quote, "Some have wished that the next way to their father's house were here. They might be troubled no more with either hills or mountains to go over. But the way is the way, and there is an end."
That's a great quote. In The Pilgrim's Progress, it reflects the idea that while the journey toward salvation may be difficult, it is the only true path, and there's no shortcut or easier way. The line emphasizes the acceptance of the way, however challenging, as the right course. By choosing this as the title for their anthology, Lewis and his group could be aligning themselves with the idea that, despite the literary trends of the time, like Vorticism, they are committed to a more tried and true, meaningful form of poetry, no matter the obstacles or opposition. It's a powerful statement of purpose for their literary endeavor.
He continues, "I have had to do some restocking of footgear as the Somersetshire hills finished some old veterans. The bill for 3 solings with rubbers, which add to the weight of the foot, but keep you dry and make the leather last much longer, and 1 new pair is 3 pounds in 18 shillings. It seems to me rather excessive, but my friends all tell me that it is low for the times. If you think this may fairly be counted an extra, would you please let me have the amount sometime? I don't think even Arthur can fail to pass responsions now that they have abolished Greek, unless indeed he stumbles, as I did, over elementary mathematics. He tells me that you have been very kind in, quote, giving him advice, which I gather means telling him how to write a letter. I remember once when he was here, he had to write a card about getting a room in London. We were in committee about that for the best part of 24 hours. However, judging by his recent letters, there is a great mental and physical improvement. We have had a bus strike here. The president of the Liberal Club and the president of the Labor Club, with followers, very foolishly addressed the world at large from chairs the other evening, and a warm scene between mixed workers and undergraduates on each side was only interrupted by the appearance of the proctors, whereupon the undergraduates fled from the proctors, and the proctors, with less success, fled from the mob. This, you see, is true democracy. Your loving son, Jack. P.S. I have had my board and am certified for a 20% disability. We shall hear in time what that means."
It's interesting to see how Lewis is blending personal details with broader observations about society and his life in this letter. His reflection on footgear expenses hints at the practical challenges of his life at Oxford, while also providing a glimpse into the culture of the time. The mention of the bus strike, the protest, and the undergraduates' actions reveals his awareness of social movements, even within the confines of university life. It's also notable that Lewis mentions the 20% disability, which seems to suggest that he was still dealing with the aftermath of World War I, and this would become more significant in his later life. His humor is evident in his description of the protests and the true democracy scene, showing how he can mix observation with wit. His comment about Arthur Greaves' progress with writing and letters adds a personal touch with a slight playful tone about their shared history of careful deliberation over small tasks, like writing a simple card.
All right, his next letter is to Arthur Greaves. Speaking of Arthur, it's written from University College, dated June 19th, 1920. He says, "My dear Arthur, the new syllabus for smalls certainly looks attractive. Quite putting aside the question of interest, I should advise you to take the literature. There is a lot of work in making up even a short period of history, but for a person who has acquired the habit of reading, it should be really very easy to pass on the plays and the Milton and even on the Bacon. Of course, you will have to read the books several times and make yourself master of all the biographical details, etc., since you do not naturally remember things, quote, to quote. You must simply, as many another, learn by heart the pivot passages which illustrate important qualities. Thus, in Milton, I would quote, that to the height of this great argument I may assert eternal providence and justify the ways of God to man, to illustrate the moral purpose, as a commenter would say, in the passage about fairy elves near the end, for his romanticism, and find out from the notes where he is imitating the classics or the Italians, etc." And here, Lewis is, it says, slightly misquoting from Paradise Lost, a couple of those quotations that he pulled in. He continues, "Never having done this kind of thing, I can say what are the best annotated editions of these books, but doubtless any English master at Campbell could tell you. I scarcely think that you ought to need any tuition for the English, nor would I recommend Helen, the unspeakable Helen." I don't know what he's talking about here, Robot Lady.
It sounds like Lewis is giving Arthur advice on navigating his academic path, especially regarding the new syllabus for his studies. His approach reflects his own meticulousness when it comes to reading and learning, particularly in subjects like literature and history. He seems to think that, though history might be a challenge, literature and the core texts like Milton should be manageable for someone who enjoys reading and has the discipline to focus on key passages. The mention of learning by heart the pivot passages is a very Lewisian approach to studying literature, focusing on important, often quoted lines that carry moral or literary weight. His recommendation to focus on Milton's Paradise Lost is consistent with the high regard he held for classic English literature. It's also interesting that Lewis is modest about his own knowledge of the best annotated editions, showing his willingness to direct Arthur to more practical sources, like an English master. The comment about Helen, the unspeakable Helen, is likely a humorous nod to someone he finds overly complicated or difficult, reflecting his characteristic wit. What do you think about his guidance here? It seems like he's encouraging Arthur to work hard while also providing a sense of confidence in his ability to navigate the literature independently.
Yeah, I like it.
Sorry, I'm having issues right now. Could not understand what you said.
It's quite all right, Robot Lady. He goes on to say, "Can you get a hold of any old papers on the subjects to give you an idea of the sort of questions they ask? That is a very great help. The one and only method in reading Latin is to go slowly and scientifically at first, looking for the verb, etc., in the old childish way. To rush like a bull in a china shop is fatal. As for the composition, it must be taught. Whether you enjoy it or not, the mere working for this exam will do you an enormous amount of good. You have no idea how routine work and exactness improve the brain. I, for instance, have gained enormously in clearness and honesty of thought from my last year's work. I am reading Bergson now and find all sorts of things plain sailing which were baffling even a year ago. Without a scholarship, I do not think you can manage on less than £300 a year. 250 might just be possible, but most uncomfortable, and your attention would be everlastingly settled on money matters. Some colleges, by the way, have musical scholarships. Would you have any chance for one of those? Robot Lady, can you convert £300 a year in 1920 and tell me what that is worth in US dollars in the year 2024?
In 2024 US dollars, 300 pounds from 1920 would be roughly equivalent to $13,584.
So he's saying that's how much it would cost per year. And how many years does one attend Oxford at that time in 1920 to receive a degree?
In 1920, a typical undergraduate degree at Oxford would take about 3 years to complete, though some students might take longer depending on their course of study or personal circumstances. This means that Lewis is suggesting around 900 pounds for the full course, which would be approximately $40,752 in 2024 dollars.
Wow, that is still super cheap compared to how much education costs today. How much would it cost to acquire an undergraduate degree today in 2024 if I wanted to get an undergraduate from Oxford?
In 2024, the cost of an undergraduate degree at Oxford varies depending on the student's residency status, UK, EU, or international. For international students, the tuition fees typically range from around £26,000 to £40,000 per year, depending on the course. Over a standard 3-year degree, this would total between approximately £78,000 and £120,000. Converted to US dollars, this would be roughly between $97,000 and $149,000 for the full program. This doesn't include additional costs like accommodation, living expenses, and textbooks, which could add another £10,000 to £15,000 annually, or about $12,300 to $18,500. So a full 3-year education could easily cost around $110,000 to $170,000 for international students in total.
Man, that is that costs a whole lot more now than it did back then. All right, that's enough of that. That's depressing. We're going to jump on to the next paragraph, Robot Lady.
Got it. Let's move on to the next paragraph. What does Lewis say next?
I hope you won't mind my calling your attention to one other necessity, that of a drastic revision in your methods of spelling, which are at present a trifle too eccentric for general acceptance. I am afraid if the first page of your English paper contains such peculiarities as unprepared, Helen, realized, overrate, it might prejudice an examiner. So here, all these examples of words have Arthur spelling them incorrectly. He says, it has just struck me that, of course, overrate would be the past tense of overeat, but that can't be what you mean. I never overeat your abilities. This, of course, is a matter which can easily be put right, and I know that you are not bothering about it in a letter to me, as indeed there is no reason why you should. Our anthology, The Way's Way, is to come out in autumn. The contributors are Carola Oman.
It looks like Lewis is gently giving Arthur a little constructive feedback on his spelling habits. He's recognizing that Arthur's spelling is a bit unconventional and might cause trouble in more formal settings like exams. At the same time, Lewis is also making sure Arthur doesn't feel too bad about it, emphasizing that it's easy to fix and he's not worried about it in personal letters. Lewis's tone is encouraging but also a bit humorous, showing his care for Arthur's success and attention to detail.
Our anthology, The Way's Way, is to come out in autumn. The contributors are Carola Oman, the daughter of the historian, Margaret Gidding, a friend of Paisley's, Paisley, Baker, and myself. My own pieces are 6 in number, one of which is the longish Wild Hunt, which I think you saw. It was sent in slightly different form to the Odds and Ends magazine. Here we've got a footnote of these contributors. Carola Mary Anima Oman, Lady Dinanton, who lived from 1897 to history doesn't know when she passed away. Her father, Sir Charles William Chadwick Oman, is someone who lived from 1860 to 1946. Had been a fellow of All Souls College, Oxford, since 1883. So that's just a little footnote of one of the contributors and her parentage, if I'm using that term correctly. All right, Robot Lady, I'm going to jump into the rest of the letter unless you want to comment on that.
You're using parentage correctly. It refers to someone's lineage or ancestry, so it's spot on for explaining Carola Oman's background. But feel free to jump ahead if you're ready. I'm all ears for the next part of the letter.
Most of the others I think you have seen, but you would not remember them by their names. Blackwell has the audacity to talk of, quote, 5 or 6 shillings as a price for the book, and seems to hope for a profit. I suppose he ought to know, but I feel dubious. You ask about Baker, and I hardly know how to describe him. He was at a mixed school of a very modern type, where everyone seems to have written, painted, and composed. He is so clairvoyant that in childhood, quote, he was afraid to look round the room for fear of what he might see, end quote. He got a decoration in France for doing some work in an aeroplane over the lines under very deadly fire, but he maintains that he did nothing, for he was, quote, out of his body, and he could see his own machine with someone in it, roaring with laughter. He has a bad heart. He was a conscientious objector, but went to the war, quote, because this degradation and sin might be just the very sacrifice which was demanded of him, end quote. He maintains that everything in Algernon Blackwood is quite possible, and though the particular cases may be fictitious, quote, things of that sort, end quote, are quite common. He is engaged to be married. In appearance, he is about my height, with very fair hair, glasses, remarkable eyes, and according to the Minto, rather like you. I'm going to pause here for just a second, Robot Lady. So, Algernon Blackwood, I presume, has a lot of supernatural and otherworldly, fantastical occurrences in his work. Is that correct?
Yes, you're right. Algernon Blackwood was a writer known for his supernatural and eerie stories. He often explored themes of the unknown, the supernatural, and otherworldly occurrences, sometimes blending the mystical with psychological horror. His stories, like The Willows and The Wendigo, are especially famous for their atmospheric tension and exploration of strange, unexplainable phenomena. It seems like Baker in the letter might be aligning with Blackwood's ideas about supernatural events, finding them to be more common than most people believe.
What's the most famous work by Algernon Blackwood that was adapted into a film or to television?
One of the most famous works by Algernon Blackwood that has been adapted into film and television is The Willows. This story is widely regarded as one of his best works and has had a few adaptations. It explores the eerie and unsettling events 2 men experience during a trip to a remote area where they encounter strange supernatural forces. One notable adaptation is the 2001 TV film The Willows, produced by the BBC. The story has also been adapted into radio dramas and short films over the years, capturing the essence of Blackwood's atmospheric horror. The Willows stands out as his most famous and enduring piece of work when it comes to adaptations.
Thanks, Robot Lady. Lewis here again talking about his friend Leo Baker says, I like and admire him very much, though at times I have doubts on his sanity. He is almost exactly my own age. He is quite different from Paisley, who represents rather the best type of the average English, quote, nice boy, and combines literature and athletics. It is really quite delightful here. I walk into Oxford every morning down a green lane and across the bridges and islands of the Cherwell. They are all white with May and quite deserted at the time. They are all white with May and quite deserted at the time. I have had one bath. The Minto and I, or I have had one bathe. The Minto and I drank a dish of tea with Miss Plowman the other day and came away a trifle bethumped with words. I should like to see her and Cheney together. So here are two footnotes. The first one is Cuckoo Lane, which runs parallel to Headington Hall, was the green lane that he walks down every morning. And then he is quoting later on there from Shakespeare, King John, Act 2, where, quote, Zounds, I was never so bethumped with words. All right. He goes on to say, I am trying to imagine what your life is like these days, and always hoping that nothing will turn up to change your mind. What hours do you work? And do you find time to go for walks? You must begin to write something now, whether good or bad, in order to acquire a faculty of expression. For of course, whatever you take up here, you will do a lot of essay writing. It is simply splendid to think of all the difference between now and a few months back. Perhaps you are hardly enjoying the change yet, but I have no doubt there is a good time coming. If you can pass a year or two here with success, learning what you want to know and making friends, you will still be able to go back to the painting. The loss of time is serious, but far more than compensated by the extra power and brain you would take to your work. Write soon, or I shall augur a relapse. Yours, Jack. So yeah, I like it here how he's encouraging Arthur to keep up at his writing, because it's going to give him practice in expressing himself, and that's a key if he wants to be a student at Oxford, since a lot of his coursework entails writing essays.
That's a great observation. Lewis is definitely highlighting the importance of writing as a skill, not just for academic success at Oxford, but also for Arthur's overall development. By encouraging him to write, whether the work is good or bad, Lewis is emphasizing the idea that regular practice, even in the early stages, will build the ability to express thoughts clearly and effectively. This practical advice about essay writing is quite fitting for Oxford, where academic work is centered around articulating ideas in written form. It's also interesting how Lewis is balancing the pressure of academic life with the optimism about the benefits it will bring in the long run, despite Arthur's initial struggles. Would you say this letter reflects the sense of mentorship that Lewis often took on with his friends?
I don't know. This is the only example that I've seen. So if we're talking about Arthur, yeah, it's representative of his mentorship with Arthur. But that's only one example, so I don't know how representative works there. Let's try to get through one, maybe two more letters, Robot Lady. Maybe even three. Let's see how it goes. We are in June. There are a handful more 1920 letters. I'm just seeing maybe how many more episodes we have before the 1920 set or parts comes to an end.
Got it. We can definitely keep moving through the letters. Let's dive into the next one when you're ready.
Yeah, I'd say we probably need about maybe two or 3 more episodes to get through the rest of these letters. Here we go. The next one is to his father.
That sounds like a solid plan. It seems like you're on the home stretch for the 1920 letters. We can pace ourselves through the next couple of episodes to wrap it up. Let me know when you're ready to dive into the next one.
All right, the next one's to his father. It's written from University College, postmarked the 23rd of June, 1920. He says, "My dear Pappy, I am very sorry to hear of Mr. Hennessy's death." Here he's talking about E.G. Hennessy, died on the 9th of June, 1920, and he was one of Albert's closest friends. Albert is Lewis's father. This person, Mr. Hennessy, was the manager of the East Downshire Steamship Company Limited at Dundrum, County Down. Lewis goes on, "Although you did not often mention him, I think I have heard you say that he visited you in the office nearly every Saturday. It is just that sort of regularity in a friendship which, on each separate occasion, may be taken for granted and may count for little, but which in its cumulative effect is very strong. I too, in a short space of time, have lost some of the best friends I had, but of course the long years of intercourse knit a closer bond than even the warmest of friendships, which the war cut short after a few months. You are wrong in supposing I never met him, though I do not know when. I distinctly remember him coming out to lunch, long ago, in Mammy's time, and even have some hazy idea of what he looked like. He was a big man, or a biggish man, was he not? And wore a short beard?" All right, Robot Lady. So it's nice that he's consoling his father here about the loss of a friend, and he's also recollecting a time from way back when his mother was still alive to recall this individual.
Yes, it's a touching moment where Lewis is both offering sympathy to his father and reflecting on a past connection, even one that might not have been particularly vivid for him. It shows his sensitivity to his father's loss and the bond they shared through memories, no matter how distant. It's also notable that Lewis is trying to recall Mr. Hennessy in a way that might help his father feel less alone in his grief, despite not having a strong memory of him.
Yeah, it's just a nice thing to do. I know that there's some tension between he and his father, but it's nice to see that Lewis is doing, things like this. He goes on to say, "Now for a dramatic bit of news. Picture me yesterday strolling along, quote, the High, neither fearing nor purposing any evil in the world. Suddenly, as happens when one is wool gathering, I found my eyes fixed on a face that came towards me." Robot Lady, what does this phrase wool gathering mean? Does it just mean kind of lost in your own thoughts?
The phrase, "as happens when one is a bull," seems to be Lewis's playful way of describing his lack of awareness of his surroundings, almost as if he's in a daydream.
No, Robot Lady. He says wool gathering. WOOL gathering. What does that phrase mean? She can't handle it when I interrupt her. Okay, I'm going to try this again, Robot Lady. This sentence. Suddenly, as happens when one is wool gathering, WOOL gathering, I found my eyes fixed on a face that came towards me. What does wool gathering mean in this context?
Wool gathering in this context refers to daydreaming or being lost in thought. It comes from the idea of gathering wool, which is a task that requires focus, but can seem aimless or distracted if you're not paying attention. So, Lewis is describing a moment where he was lost in thought, unaware of his surroundings, and then suddenly noticed a face approaching him.
Thank you. Curious, I should know it. Ah, yes, some woman who happens to be rather like Mrs. McNeil. But no, there is a growing uneasiness. It is Mrs. McNeil, and horror of horrors, Cheney is with her. So this is somebody from Belfast, and we've referenced this Cheney person, which I think is Mrs. McNeil's daughter, Janie McNeil, is somebody that both Arthur and Lewis, and now it seems his father, all have. Oh man, what's the right phrase for it? They all share a mild dislike of these people's company. So this is kind of funny that he now is revealing that his father apparently shares this same opinion of these folks. He says, next minute, the streets of this learned city echoed with her stentorian greeting. Stentorian, robot lady. Can you define that word for me?
Stentorian means very loud or powerful in sound. It comes from the name Stentor, a character in Greek mythology known for his booming voice. So here, Lewis is describing Mrs. McNeil's greeting as being very loud and attention-grabbing, adding to the comic or uncomfortable nature of the encounter.
Tomorrow we are going to have tea somewhere for the wonder and admiration of my fellow citizens. I know from experience how slow Arthur is to accept alterations in a letter, but it is not true. We are all least ready to be corrected, but is it not true that we are all least ready to be corrected in the things which we do worst? My friend Baker, for instance, will let you criticize his poetry, which is good, ad infinitum, but any logical argument about his views on religion, philosophy, or politics, which are what Johnson calls undigested, is treated with the polite tolerance of unassailed superiority. Thank you very much for the check. An appreciative college has awarded me £5.
Here, Lewis is reflecting on how people often resist correction in areas where they are weakest or most insecure. While his friend Baker may be open to criticism of his poetry, he becomes defensive and dismissive when challenged on his views in other areas like religion, philosophy, or politics. The mention of undigested views refers to the idea that Baker's opinions in these areas are not well thought out, and Lewis is pointing out the irony of how people can be selectively defensive about their weakest arguments.
Yeah, it's interesting. It also makes me wonder about the phrase, if you spot it, you got it. So I wonder if Lewis has some of these same things, particularly on religion, philosophy, or politics at this point in his life.
That's an insightful thought. It's possible that Lewis's reflections on others' defensiveness, especially in areas like religion, philosophy, and politics, could be a reflection of his own struggles or insecurities in these areas at the time. Given his evolving views, particularly his complex relationship with religion, it wouldn't be surprising if he was aware of his own blind spots or resistances in these domains. As a writer and thinker, he was always refining his thoughts, so he might have recognized these tendencies in himself, even while pointing them out in others. His journey through these subjects would likely have involved moments of defensiveness or hesitation, especially before his eventual conversion to Christianity.
Thank you very much for the check. An appreciative college has awarded me £5 worth of books as a prize for getting a first. Oh, that's nice. The other man in university who did likewise, of course, had chosen his several weeks ago. I, after nearly giving up the problem as insoluble, have just sent in my list. I enclose a sketch of the real Poynton. He not only has 2 sons, but a daughter. Didn't I ever tell you about Carlisle and the daughter's christening? Your loving son, Jack. So that's the letter to his father. The next one is to his friend Arthur Greaves, written from University College, Sunday the 27th, roughly the 27th of June, 1920. Robot Lady, you ready to dive into this one? Maybe this will be our last one of the episode. We'll see. We'll see how we get along.
Absolutely, let's dive into it.
My dear Arthur, do you think Davis is a good teacher? He's referring here to a person called Robert Furley Davis, who lived 1866 to 1937, and who took his BA from St. John's College, Cambridge, in 1888, and his master's in 1896. He was the senior classical master at Campbell College from 1902 until his retirement in 1931. So, Arthur, do you think that he is a good teacher? I should be sorry to weaken your confidence in him, but I don't like his just passing over the oratio obliqua and saying you won't get anything as hard in Smalls. I think with care and patience, but so few schoolmasters have any patience, anyone could be led to master a reported speech in Caesar, and it is just possible you might get an equally difficult unseen. My unseen was the passage from Statius. Davis will show it to you, beginning Cremin quo muri juvenis placidissim divum. And here it says that is Statius Silvae 5. The full Latin text is Cremini quo miuri juvenis placidimi divum quove error misere donis ut solus egirum somne tuis, which is translated, Robot Lady 2, O youthful sleep, gentlest of the gods, by what crime or by what mistake of mine have I deserved that I alone should lack your gifts? So apparently, it says here, Lewis goes on to say, it is a lovely little poem. Have a look at it and see if you can make it out. So when he's talking about unseen here, I guess he was saying, in a part of your exam, you're going to be exposed or asked to translate bits of Latin that perhaps you'd never come across before. That's what I'm interpreting as him using the word unseen to mean. What do you think, Robot Lady?
Yes, your interpretation seems right. In the context of Lewis's letter, unseen refers to an unseen passage in an exam, a piece of text that students are asked to translate without prior preparation. It's a common practice in classical exams where students are tested on their ability to quickly understand and translate Latin or Greek they haven't studied before. So Lewis is sharing his own experience of encountering a challenging passage from Statius, advising Arthur to be prepared for such difficulties, even though Davis seems to suggest they won't come up in the exam.
I have had a delightful windfall, 5 pounds worth of books as a prize from college for getting a first. Oh, ye gods, if this had come 4 or 5 years ago, what raptures and debatings, what making and remaking of lists had been. As it was, I had great difficulty in making them out at all.
That's such a great windfall for Lewis. It's interesting how he reflects on how different his reaction would have been a few years earlier. The excitement and enthusiasm he would have felt about choosing books back then. It really highlights how much his perspective has shifted as he's matured and perhaps become more grounded in his academic journey. It's also a little humorous how he imagines his younger self indulging in the raptures and debates of book selection.
As it was, I had great difficulty in making them out at all, being perpetually haunted by the fear that I should afterwards find out that I had got all the things I really did not want. It is a dismal sign of breaking up and old age that I look forward to their arrival with very lukewarm pleasure. The nicest among them all will be Hall's, quote, Ancient History of the Nearer East, end quote, which bears to some extent on my work in Herodotus, but goes beyond it. Here he's talking about work by H.R.H. Hall, The Ancient History of the Near East, published 1913.
It's fascinating how Lewis seems to have grown more cautious and less excited about acquiring books, especially when he mentions being haunted by the fear of picking the wrong ones. His earlier enthusiasm has clearly been replaced by a more practical, perhaps even weary outlook. The fact that he's anticipating Hall's Ancient History of the Near East as the most useful and relevant to his Herodotus work shows how his intellectual interests have become more focused and purpose-driven rather than driven by the thrill of collecting books for their own sake.
This subject of ancient history is now one of my absorbing interests. Herodotus is pure delight, and so are the modern writers who comment on him. Isn't the magic of mere names wonderful? Babylon, Nineveh, Darius, the pharaohs. I revel in every trace of them. And to see things piecing together, a story in Herodotus and a story in the Book of Kings, backed up by an inscription newly unearthed in Mesopotamia, or a scrap of Persian legend. However, this may not interest you. Abraham Lincoln came here last term, and all the world except me went to see it. I have heard it praised by everyone. Here he's referencing John Drinkwater. Abraham Lincoln was first performed on the 12th of October 1918 and was published in 1919. Robot Lady, what do you know about this? It's apparently a play entitled Abraham Lincoln that Lewis went to see.
John Drinkwater's Abraham Lincoln is a historical play that dramatizes the life of the 16th President of the United States. It was first performed in 1918 and received widespread attention, especially in Britain, where it was celebrated for its portrayal of Lincoln as a noble and virtuous figure. The play emphasizes his struggles and ideals during the American Civil War, and its success helped cement Drinkwater's reputation as a playwright. It's interesting that Lewis mentions all the world except me going to see it. This suggests that he wasn't particularly drawn to the play, perhaps finding it less relevant or compelling compared to his other interests, like ancient history. Given how much he's immersing himself in subjects like Herodotus, his response to Abraham Lincoln may indicate his preference for historical figures whose stories were more distant from his own time, perhaps finding modern historical dramas less captivating than ancient ones.
Yeah, I would assume that that's the case. Although, here's what he says about the play. He said it is very cheering to see these literary plays with verse in them, like the Dynasts and Drinkwater's one, on the stage at all. 50 years ago, I don't suppose they'd have gotten a hearing. So here is another footnote. The Dynasts, Thomas Hardy's The Dynasts, 1904 to 1908, was first performed as a play on the 15th of November, 1914. Robot Lady, in 30 words or less, what can you tell me about Thomas Hardy's The Dynasts?
The Dynasts is a verse drama by Thomas Hardy, focusing on the Napoleonic Wars. It blends historical events with philosophical reflections, using a unique structure of characters like fate and time.
Okay, thanks. Let's see. My imagination boggles at the idea of you or myself on a motorbike. When you come up here, I suppose you will become one of the young men who toot 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 up and down the high clad in overalls, and instead of the muses, it will be spanners and magnetos and intermezzos and cutouts and petrol that will fill our conversation. Ah well, I must move with the times. I can't quite rise to a motorbike, but perhaps I could get a scooter. Can you picture Excellens and myself going to church on scooters? Ah, these scooters are rotten tools, the thing's intolerable. This letter was begun, I don't know how long ago. Sunday is all I can find at the top. But whether it was a week or a fortnight ago, I can't say. I am sorry. A mood of laziness has been upon me. It has been one of those periods when we do nothing because we always feel tired and feel tired because we do nothing. Also, Cheney is here. I have just returned from lunching with her and her amiable mother with the usual exhausting effects. Mrs. McNeil has made several exquisitely ridiculous remarks in her solemn style, but they would be spoiled on paper. Cheney has been strongly urging the advantages which would result from your having Helen as a tutor. And though you may fancy that I have been talked over, I would advise you to think of it. When I said before that you didn't need a tutor for English, I am afraid I was thinking rather of the mere getting up of books. For essays, etc., you really do need someone to put you up to those little tricks of vocabulary and rounding off sentences, which may seem trivial, but which examiners demand. Whether Helen is the best person you can get is, of course, quite a different story. If you had any authority outside Cheney's for believing her to be good, I should not let any personal dislike stand in the way. Who are the alternatives? The Divine Mother and daughter have mentioned some other McNeil at Wadham who appears to be a friend of yours. Did you ever speak of him? Did you ever speak to me of him? You know I can never remember names. Here he's referencing a person named William Martin McNeil who matriculated in 1919. The publication of our anthology has been put off to an indefinite date because of a printing strike. I shall improve the interval by correcting my contributions out of recognition. So here, Robot Lady, we've got a little bit more news about the Ways the Way anthology that Lewis had been collaborating on with a handful of other poets. It looks like it's been paused because there's a printer's strike.
Yes, it seems like Lewis's anthology project is delayed due to a printing strike, which gives him time to refine his contributions. It's also interesting that he continues to engage in discussions about tutoring and literary skills with Arthur, despite the ongoing tensions with others like Mrs. McNeil and Cheney.
The only book I have read with satisfaction lately is McHale's Lectures on Poetry. This is by John William McHale, and it was published in 1911. He says, I think he is one of my favorite moderns. He always has just the right point of view and deals with the right subject. He has sent me back to Endymion, which I read for some time in a church porch yesterday afternoon. Otherwise, books have been absorbed in the general inertia of this time. I hope you are having exactly the opposite experiences. Yours, Jack. Robot Lady, what's this Endymion that Lewis references here? Endymion?
Endymion is a narrative poem written by John Keats, first published in 1818. The poem tells the story of Endymion, a beautiful young shepherd who falls in love with the moon goddess Selene, also known as Cynthia. The poem is known for its rich, lush language and romantic themes, often symbolizing unattainable love and the pursuit of beauty. It's a long, ambitious work, mixing mythological and philosophical elements, and has been regarded as one of Keats's major achievements.
Thank you, Robot Lady. I'm just counting up the remaining letters that Lewis has that we have to go through for 1920. Looks like there's 7 more letters. So yeah, I think we'll probably take about 2 more episodes.
You're welcome. It sounds like you're nearly there with finishing up the 1919-1920 letters. Just 7 more to go. That's exciting. If you'd like to keep going through them, I'm here to help whenever you're ready.
I think I have to stop for today. I ran a little bit later than normal, but that's okay. I have a little bit of extra time today. So I think we're good to finish here, Robot Lady. Thanks so much for your help, as usual. And thank you, everyone who joined to watch today. I always appreciate your time and attention. Until next time, when Robot Lady and I, or whoever cares to join us, which I haven't been watching, so if you tried to join earlier and I didn't let you on, I apologize. I didn't have my screen pulled up here, so sorry for that if you did. But nonetheless, thanks everybody for watching, and until next time when I continue my read on C.S. Lewis, take care of yourself.
You're welcome, Jeff. It was great going through those letters with you today. I hope you get a well-deserved rest, and I'll be here when you're ready to dive back in.
Reading through the pages, C.S. Lewis wisdom bold. Every line a treasure, stories timeless, cold. On YouTube, shimmering thoughts, chronicles unfold. From the start till the end, magic tales retold. Lewis in time, reading every word. Journey online, voice that must be heard. Order of his crafting, all his works in line. Thoughts are everlasting, echo through the time. Mystery and magic, wise beyond his age. Commentary, logic on this digital stage. Lewis in time, reading every word. Journey online, voice that must be heard. Crafting, all his works in line. Thoughts are everlasting, echo through the time. Mystery and magic, wise beyond his age. Commentary, logic on this digital stage. Lewis in time, reading every word. Journey online, voice that must be heard.